Before a man named Henry Ford came along, cars, everything was made one at a time, by hand. But Ford had a better idea. He called it an assembly line, and nothing would ever be the same again. Ford's idea transformed American industry. It was so good that in the 80 years between the first moving assembly line in Michigan and this one building cars today in California, the basic process has changed hardly at all.
What Henry Ford would unmistakably recognize is the fact that there is a moving mechanical line and that jobs are subdivided very minutely and that people are paced by the line itself versus their own work rhythm.
That first moving assembly line was put together in 1913 in what was at the time a modern factory building in Highland Park, a suburb of Detroit.
But when Henry Ford first introduced the assembly line in 1913, there was a very craft-oriented kind of production before, where individual skilled workers would work in teams and put together a car. When Henry Ford went from there to the assembly line, productivity went up 800–900% almost overnight.
Ford had already begun trying to streamline the flow of materials into the plant, but the whole idea of breaking a process down, having the workmen stay in one station and do one job again and again and again and again, and keeping the material flowing past the workman rather than the workman moving past the material, that was the big difference with the assembly line.
Yeah, this is the way the plant looked at that time.
Life on the assembly line in the 1930s was recorded on the walls of the Detroit Institute of Arts by the Mexican muralist Diego Rivera. These monumental paintings are what Rivera saw and sketched at Ford's Rouge plant. In his paintings, Rivera included a self-portrait, representations of Henry Ford himself, and likenesses of assembly line workers he met, like Paul Boatin, an early organizer of the United Auto Workers Union.
I started working there in August of 1925. I was 15 years and 2 months old. I was just as big as I am now. They wanted me. They figured I'm gonna be a good speed-up king on the job. No problem hiring me. But they only paid me half pay, so I became a troublemaker right away.
It's a very difficult kind of work. If you repeat something once every minute, 60 minutes an hour, 8 or 9 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, that kind of repetition and boredom can be devastating.
Boring and dangerous, but very productive. In the early 1920s, half the cars in the U.S. were coming from Ford. They may have been things of beauty, but the men who made them were paying a steep price.
You couldn't talk. You needed permission to go for a drink of water. You needed permission to go to the toilet. You ate 5 or 6 minutes on company time. The big thing that Ford advertised is that you even got paid for your lunch period, they said, you see. But the fact is you stood by your machine, and in some cases, the machine kept running while you were there. Workers conspired amongst themselves to slow production down or to allow a certain number of parts to go by unfinished, so they'd be a junk at the end of the line, so the company would have to slow the conveyor.
Ford found that he couldn't keep a steady workforce. People would work on that job for a little while, and then they quit because they didn't like it. So his solution was a very practical solution, operating on the assumption that people will do almost anything if you pay them enough. He essentially doubled the prevailing wage, which was the famous $5 day.
Ah, the $5 a day is another story, because former were told, this guy used to get $2.25 for 9 hours. Now he's getting $5 for 8 hours. That's double the pay, so he's got to get double the production. You know, they put pressure on the foreman. The foreman would say, you know, they're going to take my job away. The other foreman that they're going to put in my place is worse than I am. You may not like me, but the other guy is worse. Foreman appealed to the sympathy of the workers. I tell you, you'd have to live it to see it, you know.
The conflict between men and machine shows in Rivera's paintings, in the blank faces on large, strong bodies. It was just what Ford wanted.
His idea was you come in, you park your brains, you do what you're told to do, you get paid, you go home. You're not paid to think. Now, if you go to a place like NUMMI, this idea of everybody being involved in improving the process is pushed all the way down to the guy on the shop floor.
NUMMI, short for New United Motor Manufacturing, Inc., is in California. It is the 90s version of the car assembly line, jointly owned by General Motors and Toyota. It is cleaner, quieter, and perhaps a bit less monotonous than the place Ford knew.
It is, in a sense, boring, but what we try to do in NUMMI is we want everybody to rotate to a different job. Every team member has to rotate with either 4 or 5 jobs, depending how many jobs in their team. And it breaks up the monotony of being on one job all day.
Union workers at NUMMI are included in problem-solving teams, and individuals can even bring the line to a stop. But behind the modern technology and management techniques, there is still a mile-long assembly line that Henry Ford would instantly recognize.
Of course, he wouldn't recognize robots, he wouldn't recognize work teams, he wouldn't recognize the role of the union at NUMMI. But the underlying assembly line would make Henry Ford feel very much at home.
You know, in Europe, they say the 20th century really began with World War I. Well, in America, I think the 20th century began up in Highland Park, Michigan with the assembly line.
One thing hasn't changed since Henry Ford. The most desirable cars today are still the ones made by hand, with names like Ferrari and Bentley, ones you and I can't afford.